everybody, here's another video about how to make APA graphs in Excel. So today I wanted to do a factorial experimental design. So this means and it's just going to be a 2x2 factorial design. So it's going to be a rather simple sort of tutorial on how to make first a bar graph and then a line graph. Now the bar graph and line graphs are going to be very similar in a lot of ways. We're going to use the same data for those two graphs, but the first thing that we need to do is get our data here in Excel. So I have a clear unused workbook in Excel, and I'm going to open my JASP output. JASP, I've been using JASP now for several months. It's a good free alternative to SPSS. It does most of what I need, and it's a decent program to teach students. So here's my ANOVA. I tested a biological sex and a particular group. These groups here are, as you can see from my spreadsheet, is confidence building group. So this was an intervention where students were given confidence building skills, and then the other group where they were given math skills. And the exam here that was measured was a statistics exam. There were other pieces of information that we're not going to go through in this data set. Again, this is a canned data set, so these values aren't actually real, but it's supposed to represent a college level, among other things. You can see there are some people here who are older, but for the most part, giving them math skills, confidence building skills, and seeing how they do on a post-test statistics exam. And that's what this DV is measuring here, this dependent variable exam score. And here's the results of my ANOVA. As you can see, we got an effect of the interaction between sex, males and females, and the group that they were in. We're not really too interested in that. I'm not going to go through and explain what that is, but what I want to get from this output here is the 2x2, or the interaction table. This is what I'm going to plot in my bar graph, okay, and also my line graph. And it has the bits of information that I need. I need the marginal means for each of the cells. So it's a 2x2 factorial, like I said. So it is it's got four cells. And the other thing I need is the standard errors for those means, those marginal means. And so here are all the standard errors. And you can see that there's a bit of mirroring going on here with the standard errors themselves. But we're going to put this into Excel. So I'm going to start off with by just choosing a random cell sort of in the top left corner here, and I'm going to label my table, my small little table that I'm going to make here, my 4x4. So I'm going to put in confidence building here, and math skills here, and then for sex I'm going to put male, and here I'm going to put female. I don't know where that misspelling came from. And I can double click on the edge of when you get the little back and forth cursor here, you can double click on that and it'll auto fit the wording there. I can do it for column D here, and it'll just fit them both. We don't need to do that, but showing the whole word is kind of helpful at this stage of the game. So we're gonna Alt-Tab back and forth between JASP and Excel here to get these get these data points. So we're going to start with male and math skills. Let's switch the order here. I'm going to cut that and cut this over to here, and then cut this over to here, and there we go. And then resize those cells again. Okay, so this will be a little bit easier to go back and forth through following a sort of a well-defined sequence. So the first cell is going to be filled with this mean here, 70.13. 70.13. That's male math skills group, males in the math skill group, and I will reiterate that this is a fully between groups or independent groups factorial design. So the males that were in the math skills group are not the same males that were in the confidence building, and same for the females for math skills and confidence building. So the next mean I want is male confidence building group members. That mean here is 63.71. Now we do females, so females 61.86 for math skills, 61.86, and then 76.25 for the final cell. So I have my means in my table, and this is how Excel will read the data to make it into a bar graph. The next thing I want to do is just arrange my standard errors in the same 2x2 arrangement. And how I indicate that here in this Excel file is by just putting standard error or some marker to indicate that the number I put here corresponds to this mean, the error I put here corresponds to this mean, what I put in this cell here corresponds to that mean, and what I put here corresponds to that mean. Okay, so we're going to grab those standard errors, and it's really only two numbers that I actually have to worry about. They're just the opposite for each sex. So we have 3.43 in this 3.43, and then I know that since they're the opposite, 3.43 goes there in the female confidence building group, and then I have 3.67. I generally tend to round 6.7 and then 3.67. Okay, so there I have my means and my standard deviations all ready to go. Okay. So the next step that I do is I highlight my entire, what this comes out to is a 3x3 selection. So I have 3 columns selected and 3 rows selected. Excel is going to ignore this cell here. It's going to plot these numbers, and it's going to plot one of them on the x-axis and one of them as the bar colors. And so you'll see in just a second. So I'm going to go here to insert. We click on insert, and we go over here to column or bar chart insert, and so we click on that. We're going to do a 2D column cluster, and so when I click on that, it brings up the cluster of bars. Okay, and I'm going to make that bigger for everyone to see. Okay, and we have the Excel default cluster graph. So at the start, you can see that there are various elements here that are not APA style, but they're basic elements of the graph exist. So we have one of the variables as the x-axis variable, and then the other variable here indicated by the legend as 2 different colors. Okay, so we're going to go through making this APA style step by step. So the first step that I want to do is get rid of this chart title box. APA figures do not have chart title boxes. Okay. And the next thing I want to do is actually switch which of these variables are on the x-axis and which are represented by legends. So frequently what you see is sex represented by the x-axis, plainly categorical, even though in both cases this 2x2 is a completely between subjects categorical design. And so, and part of the reason why I want to switch this here is because it'll allow me to showcase another often forgotten or often not known aspect of graph making in Excel, is that you can switch this. Even if you have your table set up in this way, represented by these different colored selections, you can just easily switch what goes on the x-axis and what becomes part of the legend. And that is this switch row and column button. For a bar graph and a simple 2-variable 2x2 here, we easily switch that, and you can see here now I have male and female on the x-axis, and the bars themselves are the two interventions of this data set. Okay, so that is step number 2. Step number 3 is I want to go and label my axes. Okay, so we want to add a primary horizontal axis for the x-axis. Okay, we click on that and it brings up this little axis title box. We'll change the sizing and everything in a later step to make it a little bit more readable, but for now we are going to put in sex, male, female, biological sex, right there. Okay, very easy. Okay, the next part, step 3b, is adding the primary vertical axis. Okay, so I double click on that, hit delete, and I'm going to go ahead and put in the label for this axis, which is, I'm going to put as statistics exam score. Okay, out, and then in parentheses there, out of 100. We'll change the y-axis in just a second. Okay, so I have my axis labels there. Now, step kind of 4, which is just a really quick intermediate step, is to move the location of the legend. Now, this is not generally an APA must-do, but as far as making this graph a little bit more readable, you want the x-axis and specifically the axis label to be the most bottom thing. And then underneath this in your manuscript, you'll have the figure caption explaining what the figure is doing and all of that. So I'm going to move this legend. So I go over to add chart element again, and I go down to legend, and here you have, generally speaking, all of these options, and then when you hover over them, you can see that the graph is changing. So generally, I like to either put the legend on the right side of the graph, so it cuts away the graph, makes it, squeezes the graph in your little picture window, or put it at the top if you want to make the graph the central piece and squeeze the graph downward. The graph is always going to conform to whatever size graph box you have. Okay, so left, again, it's the same situation with the the x-axis. The y-axis gets a little bit jumbled here, and it just doesn't look as aesthetically pleasing, we'll say. And then we also have bottom. There are more legend options, but I don't think we need to explore those because right and top are generally the most viable choices. I would not go with none because then that doesn't tell the reader what the different color bars are, so that would be a bad idea in this case. Sometimes you might not want a legend, though. That's why that option is available. So I'm going to stick with top, and it's going to put the legend at the top, so instead of the bottom. So here, sex is the bottom thing of the graph window, of the chart area, and we're going to leave the legend at the top. When I increase the size of the font a little bit later, you'll see that this amount of space from 0 to 90 to the top of the plot area is going to decrease because the font is going to take up more space. Okay, so the next step we're going to do is fix the axes. Okay, we're going to fix the axes. So the problem with the axes in Excel, in the default chart that is given to you, is that they make the x-axis this light gray, which is very difficult to see. Okay, 0 is a valid score on this statistics exam, so it should be a harsh end. Imagine if somebody got a 0, right? The other thing that is incorrect about this is that there is a non-existent y-axis. It's just numbers that seem to be going vertically. And the third thing is that Excel likes to put in the horizontal grid lines, which are helpful if you need to track going across horizontally from one number to a bar, but as far as APA is concerned, this is generally not the case. So the first thing we're going to do is get rid of the major horizontal axis. So we go to add chart element, grid lines, and we are going to uncheck primary horizontal grid lines by clicking it. Okay, and that gets rid of it. And so now it's just bars on a white background. The next thing we're going to do is double click on the x-axis. It brings up the format axis options. Okay, and the only thing we need to do in the format axis options for the x-axis is just to change the line color. So we click the paint bucket, the fill and lined options, and we click down the line menu. And here you can see color is this light gray. It's not very easy to read. So we're going to make it as harsh and contrasting as possible. So we're just going to change that to black. Okay, and it just, if I click away now, it's now just a solid black line as opposed to a gray line. Okay, so that's the only thing we need to do with the x-axis. Because these are categorical variables, we don't need any tick marks or anything on there. So we double click on the y-axis, and we have to do several things with the y-axis to make it nice and neat. The first thing is we're going to stay in the axis options, these little this little bar figure here, because Excel decided that 90 was a reasonable maximum. But in virtue of being fully transparent, we actually want to show the entire scale of the possible scores. So we're going to change that to 100 and not 90. And you can see when I hit enter there, it changed the compression of these numbers because we left the major units, which are the ones that display in numerals, as 10. If we wanted to, we could put the minor units on there, and what would happen is then there would be 12, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, all the way up. But we're not going to do that for this, because then it just gets messy. So we change the nature of the numbers on the scale. This represents the full range of scores on this statistics exam. Somebody could get everything wrong and get a 0, or people can get everything right and get 100. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to go over to tick marks. Tick marks. The thing that's missing from the y-axis as well as a line are the tick marks. Now we have three options for tick marks besides none, which is what we want to get away from. We have inside, so that is on the same side of the graph as the bars. So imagine a vertical line, they would go to the right of the line. Outside, so outside of the graphed area, which is to the left of the line, or across the vertical line, so half in, half out, basically. And so what I think looks the most, again, this is nuance, this is personal preference. What looks the most nice, the nicest, is outside. And just by virtue of clicking outside, what has happened is that Excel has now had to make a line. It's not just going to put tick marks on a non-existent line. So it made a line, and what it did was it followed the same look of the y-axis to make it nice and neat. So we have here a nice black contrasted vertical y-axis line with tick marks for each of my numerals from 0 to 100. So those are my axes. That looks very nice now. Okay. Next thing I want to do is increase the font size. So I'm going to go ahead and close format chart area because we don't need that right now. So I'm going to just go through all of the where text is and increase the size, because APA says you should make your fonts in your figures readable. Now Calibri is a decent font because it is a sans serif font. That means it doesn't have the little serifs on the ends of letters like a serif font such as Times New Roman, you know, the thing that you're typing the manuscript. We're looking for readable here. It's easier for the reader to look at the graph really quickly and know what it is saying. So I'm going to leave the font as Calibri throughout the graph, but I'm going to change the font size. 14 is a great font size. It's not too big, it's not too small, and as you can see, when I change that graph to font size to 14, by the way, I'm in Home and not in Chart Tools Designer format. Just go to Home and change the font size there. You can see that it compressed the plot area downward, right? It smashed it downward. So the legend and the legend box, which as you can see here has its own sizing box, so you can make this bigger or smaller if you want. But increasing the font size necessarily increases the box size, which decreases the plot area size. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my y-axis label, and I'm going to increase that font size to 14 as well. Again, because it needs to it increases the size of the box. It compressed the plot area to the right. It's totally fine. There's a lot of white space in this plot area, so it's not a big deal. I'm also going to do this again with the x-axis. So right in 14, hit enter, and it increase the size of my x-axis labels. And then I'm going to do this one more time for sex, and that again compressed my plot area just a little bit more, but that's okay because you can always resize the plot area. Remember, this has to go into a Word document or another sort of word processor, so you want to make sure that you're not making it too big and you're not making it too small. Of course, if you go from Excel to Word, then these same tools are going to be available to you in Word as well. Okay. Last thing I'm going to do is click on the y-axis. This is going to change the font size of the numbers. I put 14 in there, hit enter, and there we go. We have our readable graph. But we're not done, because we haven't done anything with these standard errors yet. Okay, we need to put these error bars on the bars so we know whether or not we can determine visually if there is any sorts of differences between males and females and math skills and confidence building. And whether possibly there may be an interaction, because you can see these bars sort of change their pattern. But standard errors help us to do that. Nice little visual heuristic that we get from error bars. So we got to add those error bars. This is the last step that we have to do. So with the chart selected, you go into Chart Tools, Design, and it brings up that menu. We go all the way over to the left here to Add Chart Element, and we slide down to Error Bars. Now you have a bunch of error bar options. Some of these error bars aren't all that helpful. Standard errors, not entirely sure where Excel is getting them. They look right, but they're possibly not right. And so we're not going to trust Excel. In this case, we're going to make sure that Excel has the right numbers, right? Because standard error has a lot to do with sample size, and we don't know if Excel understands the sample size from our means. Percentages, not really helpful in this situation. Not sure when you would use them. I've never used them. Standard deviations, we don't need standard deviations. They're not also symmetrical around the mean, so that's not helpful. So we're going to use more error bar options. Now, it brings up the series add error bars box, right? So it add error bars based on series. So we have two series. These series correspond to whatever variable is represented by the legend here. Okay, so my blue bars for math skills and my orange bars for confidence building, excuse me. So it wants us to pick one, okay? And whichever one we pick, we are going to use those. So for math skills, these are my two means collapsed across sex here. So when I choose math skills, I'm actually going to focus on these two standard errors. Not these two standard errors are going across back and forth here. Just these standard errors, 3.43, 3.67, vertically in column C. So C8 and C9. So I'm going to click OK, and it's going to bring up the Format Error Bars toolbox. Okay, and here you have the visual information options. So we have which direction you want Excel to put for the error bars, both only the negative, only the positive. We're going to do both since the error bars themselves are going to be black and we have blue and orange bars. There will be situations where you would want to do minus and plus. We're going to skip that for now. And then the other visual option is whether or not there's an end cap. I always use end caps because it's a hard end, right? And then here's where we determine the error amount. So fixed value, Excel randomly generates 10. It's probably based on the axis scale. Percentage, again, that's a randomly generated 5%. We're not going to skip that. Standard deviations, don't know where 1 is coming from. And then standard error, again, that's probably not right because those values are equal. Those bars look equal to me. That bar looks like the same size as that bar, when in fact we know that that isn't the case. It's 3.43 and 3.67. So this bar should be slightly larger. That's why we are not going to trust Excel on its calculations. So we click on Custom, and then we have to specify our values. So we specify we specify our positive and our negative values. Okay, our positive and negative values are going to be the same. Okay, they're going to be the same because standard errors are symmetrical around the mean. Okay, so for our positive error value, as long as we go in the same order, and that's how Excel reads it, it goes C8 and then it goes C9, it knows that C8 is 470.13 and C9 is 461.86. Okay, so that's a positive value. We need to do that again for the negative value. So we highlight this default value, and you can either hit delete to make sure it's gone. I'm going to go ahead and do that to make sure it's gone. Or you can highlight and just highlight the values again. So the other way you can do that is once you get the positive in, you can highlight all of this. You can just go from the equal sign over, copy and paste in the negative error value. Just whatever you want to do, on however you want to do that. Just make sure that these formulas for the sheet selection are the same. Okay. Then we hit OK, and here we get our 2 error bars. Okay. Now you're probably not going to be able to notice the difference, but these look just a wee bit smaller, just a wee bit bigger. Okay, so we're going to do that again now, one more time, with the orange bars, the confidence building. So we got to, add chart element, error bars, more error bar options. It brings up which series we want to do. So we've already done math skills, so we're going to do confidence building. Okay, both directions, an end cap, custom, specify our values. The default is always going to be 1, so we go ahead and pick that, and then we get rid of that, hit delete, and we select that again. Okay, again, positive, since this is only confidence building, we're going D8 and D9 now, as opposed to using these two. Again, these are in the same place. Okay, and so they go into the positive and they go into the negative. Okay, and I hit OK, and I can click away from the chart, close the format chart area, click away from the chart, and there we go. We have our bar graph for a 2 by 2 factorial between subjects, independent groups design, males and females. This is part 1 of the factorial graph creation. Part 2 will be this same data set, but making a line graph. And a line graph is useful for a factorial to see if there is an immediate visual cue for an interaction. So please stay tuned for part 2. Click over to part 2, and you can see how we take this data and make a line graph. Thank you for watching. Bye.